What do hammers, holy water, and orchestras have in common? You're about to find out in this Fun-Sized Felony. Welcome back to Forgotten Felonies. I'm Monica, and this is a fun-sized felony. Before we begin, no felony is ever fun. When I say fun-sized, I mean the story is short, not that the crime itself was light or trivial. This case takes us back to July of 1926 in Syracuse, New York. Before there was a hammer and holy water, there was music. In the Izzo household, music was not simple background noise. It was identity. It was a source of intergenerational pride carried across an ocean. Agostino Izzo was born in 1876. Bruna Fusco was born 4 years later. They got married twice, once in Ohio in 1901 and again in December of 1904 over in Italy. Both Agostino and Bruna had immigrated to the United States before they ever even met, but their Italian roots were very, very strong, and their families back home were very large and supportive. Children arrived quickly in this union. There was one in 1903, another in 1904, another in 1905, and over time, the household would grow to include 8 children in total. Now, that's 8 that we know of for sure, but 9 if you count Maria, who may or may not actually have been one of their children. Those records are a little bit wishy-washy and unclear. So here's the order of the kids: Andrew, Maria, Anthony, Fabio, Rosa, Ernest, Lorenza, Samuel, and Mafalda. So in that order. So the first 7, if you do count Maria, they were born in almost back-to-back years. And then Florenza was the 6th one. She was born in 1911. And the next one to be born was Samuel in 1920. So there was a 9-year gap between Florenza and Samuel. 3 years after Samuel was born, they brought little Mafalda into the world. But she passed away actually before she reached her 2nd birthday. If you do count Maria and take into account little Mafalda's tragic passing, that leaves 8 children alive in 1926. The youngest, Samuel, was 6 years old, and then the next oldest being Florenza at about 15. Agostino and Bruna traveled back and forth from the U.S. and Italy. Their first child was born in Ohio, and their third was actually born in Italy. And it seemed to go back and forth like that. I think a couple of them were sporadically born in Italy rather than the United States. Now, I'm not sure when they left Ohio for good, but at some point, the family settled in Seneca Falls, New York. And while they were there, a few more kids were born, and Agostino ran a grocery store on Ovid Street. But he was more than just a shopkeeper. He was also a musician. He was a member of the Seneca Falls Italian Band. Records also describe him as having been a music teacher. He passed his talent and his enthusiasm for music to many of his offspring. Just imagine the sounds that were just coming from the windows of that home. Evenings filled with practice, brass instruments warming up in small bedrooms, maybe violin, maybe flute, sheet music spread across the kitchen table. I bet their father was correcting their posture, maybe helping them with proper finger placement, and I imagine them counting time together while he was teaching them rhythm and while they were learning new music pieces that were difficult. Music would have been woven into their daily life. Practice, rehearsals, recitals, and concerts. It was not simply entertainment for them. It was part of their culture. It was just part of who they were. And the children carried it forward. Andrew Valetti Izzo, born in 1903, he eventually moved to Detroit and he played in an orchestra. That became his whole career. Anthony Mark Izzo later performed with the Jan Savitt Orchestra during the swing era, and I'm not sure if I pronounced any of that correctly. Rosa Izzo became a member and eventually the president of the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra. and Florenza Izzo participated in the Community Orchestra Association. So that's 4 of the kids, and that's just what I found in the papers. It's possible and highly likely that the rest of the children also played instruments or sang, and it just didn't wind up in the paper. By the year 1916, the family had moved from Seneca Falls to Syracuse, New York. A decade passed, and this is actually where Samuel was born in 1920, and then little Mafalda in 1923, followed by her death in 1925. The remaining children grew older, and by July of 1926, 23-year-old Andrew had left the nest for Detroit to follow his dreams with the orchestra. So 7 children remained at home on North Townsend Street in Syracuse. And somewhere inside that once harmonious household, the family dynamic seemed to lose its rhythm. On Tuesday, July 13th, 1926, the house was quiet. According to Agostino, the 7 children were away. Agostino was in the cellar, pouring himself a drink from the tap of a barrel of wine. There were no violins playing, no brass, there were no scales being practiced. It was just quiet. According to his later confession, he and Bruna had been arguing over a check for $12.15. Now, this sum sounds very small. It sounds very trivial to us today. But back in 1926, $12.15 had the spending power of about $222.61 in today's U.S. currency. If you're a large family of 9, 2 adults and 7 kids, and you're living on a music teacher's salary, I imagine $222 is a lot of money. I never did see what this check was for. They never said that in the papers, but I have a feeling that it was either money she was sending to Detroit for her beloved eldest son, or maybe it was a bill of her son's that she was paying for him. And the reason why I think this is because Agostino's only reason for why he did what he did, and I'll tell you in a minute, was that his wife loved the boys more than she loved him. He was actually quoted as saying, "My wife loved the boys more than she did me." So these were the sons who played. They played music. These were the sons who were performing, the sons who were stepping out into adulthood, just getting started, stepping into their independence, finding themselves, establishing themselves, and being recognized for wonderful things. And it really seems to me like Agostino was kind of comparing himself to them and feeling a little bit of despair about where he was in his own life. In 1926, Agostino was a 50-year-old man, so he's no longer this spry youth, with the whole world ahead of him and all these possibilities. And for men born in 1876, if you take away the rates of child mortality at the time, a man born in 1876 could realistically expect to live to their early 60s, possibly reaching the age of 70 if they were really, really lucky. So at the age of 50, Agostino's no longer looking forward with thoughts of, man, I have so much time left to do all of these things that I want to do. He probably wished that he had joined an orchestra. He probably wished he could have done some of these things that his sons were doing. But now he's 50, he's staring death in the face and he's saying, oh no, how much time do I have left? And will I ever be able to reach my goals? Anyway, Agostino later claimed that after he and Bruna had this fight over the check, he went down to the cellar to cool off. And according to him, while he was pouring his wine, Bruna came down with a butcher knife and she rushed at him. He said that he grabbed a hammer to defend himself and he swung it at her, with his right arm, and he insisted that he meant only to strike her in the shoulder, but instead he accidentally hit her in the head. And what followed was definitely not music. First there was the sound of his wife's heavy body hitting the floor, and then there was silence. I'm sure the silence was really loud for him in that moment, but it was not musical. The blow fractured her skull in the left temple, and it dropped her to the floor immediately. And what happened next is what makes this story absolutely sensational. Agostino did not flee, nor did he immediately summon help. He actually went to the church in the neighborhood and got some holy water, and then he returned to the cellar. He blessed his wife's body, and then he dressed her in her best Sunday clothing, and he sprinkled holy water over her. And then he went on the hunt for the largest box he could find, and he wound up finding a 4-foot box made of wood. So he gets this box down into the cellar, and he puts her body inside of it. Then he nailed the box shut and sprinkled holy water all over the box. Agostino next hired a truckman, Angelo Cannata, to carry the heavy box 7 miles to the shore of Onondaga Lake, to a spot that was less than a mile east of Long Branch. After dismissing the truckman, Agostino dug a grave all by himself, and then he lowered the box into the hole, and he climbed down into the grave with it, and he sprinkled holy water on it once again before climbing out and burying it. Just picture that moment. This man, this music teacher, this musical genius, this beloved father of 8. And, he's got these amazing, talented children, and they're just all so musical in this family. And he's standing inside a hand-dug grave beside the homemade coffin of the wife that he just killed with a hammer in the basement. Quite the mental picture. When the children returned home, he told them that their mother had gone to Detroit to visit Andrew. And this was plausible. Andrew lived there, and he was an established musician building his own life. But it was a little bit weird. Mom was the staple of that household. It was odd that she would just leave the state without so much as a word to the other children that depended on her, especially 6-year-old Samuel. As the day turned to night, the children all went to sleep in their beds, and Agostino Izzo was now alone in the dark. He was alone with his thoughts and his memories of what he had done around noon that day. And for the next 3 days, he tried to resume life, but there was no harmony. He later told police he could not even eat without gagging. He couldn't sleep without dreaming of the cellar and seeing what he had done, dreaming of preparing his wife for burial in her best Sunday clothes. And the children's questions, he told the police that the children's questions were driving him absolutely crazy, just ringing in his ears. Where is Mom? When will she come home? Why didn't she tell us she was leaving? It was so much pressure on him. So on the night of July 16th, 1926, he walked into police headquarters in Syracuse and confessed. He said, "I killed her Tuesday noon while the 7 children were away. Not since then have I been able to rest. I fall asleep and I dream of her." Officers then followed him to the lake shore. He pointed to a mound of fresh earth. They dug and uncovered the makeshift coffin. The next day, he was taken back to North Townsend Street to reenact the killing for them. And he repeated, he'd been angry. He repeated that he believed his wife loved the boys more than him. Agostino then signed his confession on July 17th of 1926. Attorney Richard J. Shanahan was retained as his defense counsel. During the whole investigation, they spoke to the children, of course, and 17-year-old Ernest Izzo told the authorities that his father had actually been threatening murder several times over the preceding 3 years, and he even threatened to murder Ernest himself. And Ernest ran away from home in fear that night. A panel of psychiatrists was hired to come in and evaluate Agostino. And ultimately, Agostino would not spend the rest of his life in a traditional prison. He spent the next 29 years in a state hospital where a case of pneumonia actually took his life in May of 1955. And he was actually either 78 or 79 at the time of his death, depending on when his birthday was in the year. Now, the music did not die with Agostino. Anthony continued his orchestra career, as did Andrew. Rosa would lead the Syracuse Symphony, and Florenza remained active in community music. So the children carried forward the melodies their father had once taught them, and I'd be willing to bet musical ability runs in the genes of Izzo descendants to this day. But the harmony of the Izzo children's childhood and early adulthood had been altered. They lost both of their parents that day, and considering that the majority of the children were already adults, they probably had to raise themselves from that point forward. And I know as soon as you're 18, you're an adult, but still, you depend on your parents. They did not have that option anymore. And I do know that poor 6-year-old Samuel went to stay with his brother Andrew in Detroit, and Samuel did live out the remainder of his life in Michigan. Ultimately, for Agostino, holy water could not silence his conscience. The grave that he dug on the shore of Onondaga Lake could not bury his guilt, and a single hammer blow ended decades of harmony. On July 13, 1926, inside a quiet cellar on North Townsend Street, the rhythm broke, and for Agostino Izzo, that was the day the music stopped. This has been a Fun-Sized Felony.